Sometimes the very thing we fight hardest for becomes the thing that terrifies us most. When Marcus Chen walked into that hospital, demanding only the best cardiac surgeon money could buy, he never imagined that his life would collide with a past he'd spent 20 years trying to forget. What happens when the person holding your heart in their hands is the same person whose heart you once broke beyond repair? This is the story of a man who got exactly what he asked for, and discovered that some prices are too high to pay, even when your life depends on it. Marcus Chen had always believed that money could solve any problem. At 52, he had built a tech empire from nothing, turning a small software company into a billion-dollar corporation that dominated the artificial intelligence market. His ruthless business tactics had earned him both fortune and enemies, but Marcus never cared about being liked. Results mattered. Success mattered. And when his chest began tightening during a board meeting on a rainy Tuesday morning, Marcus applied the same iron-willed determination to his health crisis that he applied to everything else in his life. The pain started as a dull ache, spreading like wildfire across his chest and down his left arm. Marcus gritted his teeth, finishing his presentation about the company's quarterly profits while sweat beaded on his forehead. The boardroom fell silent as he gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white. His assistant, Jennifer, rushed to his side as Marcus collapsed into his chair, gasping for breath. "Call my driver," Marcus managed to wheeze between labored breaths. "Take me to Presbyterian Hospital, not the emergency room. I want the VIP wing." Even in crisis, Marcus Chen demanded the best. Presbyterian Hospital was known for treating celebrities, politicians, and the ultra-wealthy. Their cardiac unit had a reputation that stretched across the country, and their private suites resembled luxury hotel rooms more than hospital accommodations. As his driver sped through downtown traffic, Marcus clutched his chest and made a mental list of demands he would make once they arrived. The VIP wing of Presbyterian Hospital lived up to its reputation. Within minutes of his arrival, Marcus was surrounded by a team of medical professionals, all speaking in hushed, professional tones. Dr. Patricia Williams, the head of cardiology, was a woman in her early 60s with kind eyes and steady hands. She examined Marcus thoroughly, running tests and asking questions about his family history, his stress levels, and his lifestyle. "Chen," Dr. Williams said, her voice calm but serious, "you've had a significant heart attack. The good news is that we caught it early. But you're going to need immediate surgery. We need to perform a coronary artery bypass to restore blood flow to your heart." Marcus nodded, his mind already calculating the logistics. "I want the best surgeon you have. I don't care about the cost. I want whoever has the highest success rate, the most experience, the best reputation. I want guarantees." Dr. Williams smiled slightly. "Mr. Chen, medicine doesn't work that way. There are no guarantees, but I can assure you that our entire cardiac team is exceptional. I would be honored to perform your surgery myself." "No." Marcus's voice was sharp, cutting through the polite atmosphere of the room. "I've done my research on this hospital. I know you have someone better. I want Dr. Elena Vasquez. I've read about her. She's performed over 3,000 cardiac surgeries with a success rate that's higher than anyone else in the state. That's who I want." The room fell silent. Dr. Williams exchanged glances with the other medical staff, and Marcus noticed a strange tension in the air. "Mr. Chen," Dr. Williams said carefully, "Dr. Vasquez is indeed exceptional. However, I should mention that she typically doesn't take on private cases. She works primarily with our charity program, treating patients who can't afford cardiac care." Marcus felt a surge of irritation. Even here, in his moment of vulnerability, people were trying to manage him, to limit his options. "I don't care what she typically does. Offer her whatever she wants. Double her usual fee, triple it. I want the best, and according to every medical journal I can find, she's the best." Williams hesitated. "Mr. Chen, there might be complications with this arrangement. Perhaps we should discuss other options." "There are no other options." Marcus's voice carried the same authority that had built his empire. "I've made my decision. Dr. Elena Vasquez will perform my surgery, or I'll transfer to another hospital. I don't have time for politics or hospital bureaucracy. My heart is failing, and I want the surgeon with the best track record to fix it." The medical team exchanged more glances, and Marcus could sense their reluctance. It only strengthened his resolve. In business, resistance usually meant he was onto something valuable. If they were this hesitant to bring in Dr. Psilocybin Vasquez, she must be even better than he thought. "I'll need to speak with Dr. Jab Vasquez personally," Dr. Williams finally said. "She'll need to review your case and agree to take you on as a patient. I can't guarantee she'll accept." "She'll accept," Marcus said with the confidence of a man who had never been told no when it mattered. "Make the call." As the medical team left his room to contact Dr. Vasquez, Marcus stared out the window at the city skyline. Each building represented a deal he'd made, a competitor he'd crushed, a victory he'd claimed. His success had come from never accepting second best, from demanding excellence even when others said it was impossible. This situation would be no different. His phone buzzed with messages from his executive team, his lawyers, and his financial advisors. News of his heart attack was already spreading through the business community, and his company stock was fluctuating wildly. Marcus ignored the messages. For once in his life, there was something more important than quarterly earnings and market share. Jennifer sat in the corner of his room, quietly handling his calls and rescheduling meetings. She had been his assistant for 8 years, and she knew better than anyone how Marcus operated. He demanded perfection from everyone around him, including himself. The idea of settling for anything less than the best surgeon would be unthinkable to him. "Sir," Jennifer said softly, "your ex-wife called. Ellen heard about your condition and wanted to know if there's anything she can do." Marcus grimaced. His divorce from Helen had been finalized 15 years ago, another casualty of his relentless pursuit of success. She had wanted a husband who came home for dinner, who remembered anniversaries, who put family before business meetings. Marcus had wanted to build an empire. They had both gotten what they wanted, but at a cost neither of them had fully understood at the time. "Tell Helen I'm fine," Marcus said. "This is just a minor setback." But even as he said the words, Marcus felt a chill of fear that no amount of money or success could warm. For the first time in decades, he was facing something that couldn't be negotiated, manipulated, or bought. His heart was failing, and despite all his wealth and power, he was just another patient in a hospital bed, dependent on the skill of someone else to save his life. Dr. Williams returned to his room 2 hours later, her expression unreadable. "Dr. Vasquez has agreed to review your case," she said. "She'll be here tomorrow morning to examine you and discuss the surgical options. However, Mr. Chen, I feel obligated to warn you that Dr. Franklin Vasquez can be challenging to work with. She has very strong opinions about patient care, and she doesn't always appreciate the expectations that come with private patients." Marcus smiled for the first time since his heart attack. A challenging doctor sounded exactly like what he needed. In his experience, the most difficult people were often the most talented. He had built his career by working with brilliant, demanding individuals who refused to compromise on quality. "I can handle difficult people, Dr. Williams. I've been dealing with them my entire career." That night, as Marcus lay in his hospital bed, surrounded by the quiet hum of medical equipment, he felt a strange mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Tomorrow he would meet the woman who would hold his life in her hands, the surgeon whose skill and reputation had convinced him to demand her services, despite the obvious reluctance of the hospital staff. Marcus had spent his entire adult life making calculated risks, betting everything on his ability to identify and acquire the best resources available. This would be his most important acquisition yet. His life depended on making the right choice, and he had never been more confident in a decision. As he drifted off to sleep, Marcus Chen had no idea that Dr. Elena Vasquez was lying awake in her own apartment across the city, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with memories she had spent 20 years trying to forget. The name Marcus Chen had hit her like a physical blow when Dr. Williams called, bringing back a flood of emotions she thought she had buried forever. The man demanding her services, the billionaire who thought money could buy anything, was the same Marcus Chen who had walked out of her life 2 decades ago, leaving behind promises, dreams, and a broken heart that had taken years to heal. Tomorrow morning, she would walk into that hospital room and come face to face with the ghost of her past, the the one person on Earth she had never wanted to see again. But Elena Vasquez was a professional, one of the most skilled cardiac surgeons in the country. She had taken an oath to help people, to use her abilities to save lives regardless of her personal feelings, even if the life belonged to the man who had destroyed her faith in love, her trust in promises, and her belief that some people were worth sacrificing everything for. The irony wasn't lost on her. Marcus Chen, the man who had always gotten everything he wanted, was about to get exactly what he asked for. And for the first time in his charmed life, he might discover that some prices are too high to pay, even when your survival depends on it. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood outside Marcus Chen's hospital room at 7:30 in the morning, her hand frozen on the door handle. 20 years of medical training, thousands of successful surgeries, and a reputation as one of the most composed professionals in the field. Yet she couldn't bring herself to turn that handle and step inside. The manila folder in her other hand contained Marcus's medical records, his test results, and the detailed surgical plan she had spent half the night preparing. What it didn't contain was any preparation for the emotional earthquake that seeing him again would trigger. Elena had built her entire adult life around helping people, saving lives, and maintaining professional distance from her patients. But Marcus Chen wasn't just another patient. He was the reason she had learned to build walls around her heart in the first place. Taking a deep breath, Elena straightened her shoulders and pushed open the door. The man lying in the hospital bed looked older than she remembered, his dark hair now streaked with silver lines of stress etched around his eyes. But it was unmistakably Marcus. The same sharp jawline, the same intense gaze that had once made her feel like the most important person in the world. Marcus was reading financial reports on his tablet when she entered, multitasking even from his hospital bed. He looked up at the sound of footsteps, and Elena watched as recognition dawned across his features. The tablet slipped from his hands, clattering onto the bedside table. Elena. Her name came out as barely more than a whisper. Mr. Felicize. Chen. Elena's voice was steady, professional, betraying none of the turmoil raging inside her chest. I'm Dr. Trez Vasquez. I understand you've requested that I perform your cardiac surgery. The formal tone hung between them like a barrier. Marcus stared at her, his mouth opening and closing without sound. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, the man who had built an empire with his words found himself completely speechless. Elena had changed in the 20 years since he'd last seen her. The young medical student he had known was gone, replaced by a confident woman in her early 40s with kind but guarded eyes. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, and she wore scrubs with the easy authority of someone who belonged in this environment completely. You're Dr. Elena Vasquez, Marcus finally managed, his voice hoarse with shock. I am. Elena moved to the foot of his bed, maintaining the distance that hospital protocol required. I've reviewed your case, Mr. Chen. You've suffered a significant heart attack, and you need immediate surgical intervention. The question is whether you still want me to be the one to perform that surgery. Marcus felt the world tilting around him. The woman standing before him was indeed the best cardiac surgeon in the state, the professional whose reputation had convinced him to demand her services. She was also Elena Rodriguez, the medical student he had fallen in love with in college, the woman he had promised to marry, the person whose heart he had broken when ambition proved stronger than love. You changed your name, he said, grasping for something to anchor himself to reality. I got married. Elena's response was matter-of-fact, professional. Vasquez was my married name. I kept it after my divorce because it was the name on all my medical credentials. The word divorce hit Marcus harder than it should have. Even after all these years, even after the pain he had caused her, some part of him had hoped that Elena had found happiness. Learning that she too had experienced the failure of marriage felt like another weight settling on his chest. Elena, I had no idea you worked here. If I had known... You would have what, Mr. Chen? Gone to another hospital? Risked your life to avoid seeing me? Elena's voice remained calm, but Marcus caught the slight edge beneath the professionalism. That would be foolish. Your condition is serious, and despite our history, I'm still the best option for your surgery. Marcus tried to sit up straighter in his bed, wincing as the movement sent pain through his chest. Our history. That's one way to put it. Elena opened his medical file, using it as a shield between them. Mr. Chen, what happened between us was a long time ago. We were different people then. I'm here as your doctor, nothing more. My personal feelings don't factor into medical decisions. But even as she spoke the words, Elena could feel her carefully constructed professional walls beginning to crack. Seeing Marcus again brought back a flood of memories she had worked hard to suppress. The late nights studying together in the library, the dreams they had shared about their future, the way he used to look at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever had. Do you remember what you used to call me? Marcus asked suddenly. Elena's jaw tightened. Mr. Chen, this isn't appropriate. You used to call me your heart. Marcus's voice was soft, almost pleading. You said I was your heart walking around outside your body, that you couldn't imagine living without me. The memory hit Elena like a physical blow. She did remember. She remembered everything about those days when love felt infinite and the future seemed bright with possibility. She remembered believing that Marcus would choose her over everything else, that their love was strong enough to survive anything. That was a long time ago, Elena said, her voice barely steady. We were children playing at being adults. I was 24 when I left. You were 23. We weren't children, Elena. We were old enough to make adult decisions, and I made the wrong one. Elena closed the medical file with more force than necessary. Mr. Chen, I need to ask you some questions about your medical history. Your current medications, your stress levels, your lifestyle choices. Can we please focus on why I'm actually here? Marcus fell silent, recognizing the steel in her voice. This was Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the country, not the Elena Rodriguez he had known in college. But as she asked her clinical questions and made notes in his file, Marcus couldn't stop studying her face, looking for traces of the woman he had once loved. She had always been beautiful, but there was a strength in her features now that hadn't been there before. Lines around her eyes spoke of long hours and difficult decisions. Her hands, once soft from student life, now bore the calluses of a surgeon who had spent years saving lives. She had become everything she had dreamed of becoming, even without him. Your stress levels appear to be extremely high, Elena noted, reviewing his test results. Your blood pressure, your cortisol levels, the amount of damage to your arteries, all consistent with someone who has been pushing themselves far beyond healthy limits for years. Success requires sacrifice, Marcus said automatically. Elena looked up from her notes, and for just a moment her professional mask slipped. Does it? Or does success just become an excuse for sacrificing the things that actually matter? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with 20 years of unspoken accusations and regrets. Marcus knew she wasn't just talking about his health anymore. Elena, Dr. Vasquez, she corrected firmly, and we need to discuss your surgical options. You have significant blockages in 3 of your major arteries. I recommend a triple bypass surgery. It's a complex procedure, but with your age and overall health, your chances of full recovery are excellent. Marcus nodded, trying to focus on the medical information while his mind reeled from the emotional implications of the situation.
How long will the surgery take?
Approximately 4 to 6 hours, depending on what we find when we open you up. There are always risks with cardiac surgery: bleeding, infection, reaction to anesthesia. But I've performed this procedure over 1,000 times with a success rate of 97%. And you're willing to operate on me, despite everything? Elena was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out across her features. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but resolute. Marcus, you broke my heart 20 years ago. You chose your career over our relationship, your ambitions over our future together. You left me standing at the airport with engagement rings and wedding plans and a belief that love could conquer anything. She paused, taking a steadying breath. But I took an oath to help people, to save lives when I can. My personal feelings don't get to override that oath, no matter how much history we share. Marcus felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes, something that hadn't happened in years. I'm sorry, Elena. I know that doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry. I know you are. Elena's voice was gentle now, and for a moment, she sounded like the woman he remembered. But apologies don't change the past, Marcus. They don't undo the choices we made or the pain we caused. What if I had stayed? Elena looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw something vulnerable flicker across her face before she rebuilt her professional composure. That's not a question either of us can answer. We are who we are because of the choices we made, all of them. You became a billionaire. I became a surgeon. We both got what we thought we wanted, did we? Marcus asked. Did you get what you wanted, Elena? Before she could answer, Dr. Williams knocked on the door and entered the room. Dr. Vasquez, how is our patient doing? Elena stepped back from Marcus's bed, the moment of vulnerability disappearing behind her professional mask. Mr. Chen is a good candidate for surgery. I've explained the procedure and the risks. We can schedule the operation for tomorrow morning if he consents. Dr. Untold. Williams looked between them, clearly sensing the tension in the room. Excellent. Mr. Chen, you're in very capable hands. Dr. Vasquez is truly one of our finest surgeons. I'm beginning to understand that, Marcus said, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. Williams left. Elena gathered her files and prepared to leave. A nurse will be by shortly to begin your pre-surgical preparations. I'll see you in the operating room tomorrow morning. Elena, wait. Marcus's voice stopped her at the door. Will you stay? Just for a few minutes. I know I don't have the right to ask, but... You're right, Elena said quietly. You don't have the right to ask. But I'll stay anyway because I need to say something to you. She returned to his bedside, but remained standing, maintaining the distance between them. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to cut open your chest and hold your heart in my hands. I'm going to repair the damage and give you a chance at many more years of life. And I'm going to do it because it's my job, because I'm good at it, and because saving lives is what gives my life meaning. Marcus nodded, sensing that she wasn't finished. But I need you to understand something, Marcus. When I operate on you tomorrow, I won't be thinking about the boy I loved in college, or the man who broke my heart, or the years I spent getting over you. I'll be thinking about the patient on my table who deserves the best care I can give him. Because that's who you are to me now. Not Marcus Chen the billionaire or Marcus Chen the man who left, but just another patient whose life is in my hands. I understand, Marcus said softly. Elena moved toward the door again, then paused. Get some rest, Marcus. Tomorrow is going to be a long day for both of us. As the door closed behind her, Marcus Chen lay back in his hospital bed and stared at the ceiling. He had demanded the best surgeon, insisted on excellence, and gotten exactly what he asked for. But he was beginning to understand that excellence came with a price he hadn't anticipated. The woman who would hold his life in her hands tomorrow was indeed the most skilled cardiac surgeon he could have asked for. She was also the woman whose own heart he had stopped 20 years ago, and the irony of that wasn't lost on him. Tomorrow, Elena Vasquez would have the power to save his life or let him die, and Marcus realized that for the first time in his adult life, his fate was completely in someone else's hands. Outside his room, Elena leaned against the hallway wall and closed her eyes, fighting to regain her composure. Tomorrow, she would perform one of the most important surgeries of her career, operating on the man who had taught her that love wasn't always enough, that promises could be broken, and that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us deepest. But she was a professional, one of the best in her field. She would save Marcus Chen's life, because that's what she did. She saved lives. Even when the life belonged to the man who had nearly destroyed hers 20 years ago. The operating room at Presbyterian Hospital was a cathedral of modern medicine, its sterile surfaces gleaming under powerful lights, monitors beeping steadily, and the quiet efficiency of a well-trained surgical team preparing for one of the most complex procedures they performed. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood at the scrub station, methodically washing her hands and forearms, her movements automatic after thousands of similar preparations. At 5:30 in the morning, the hospital hallways were quiet, except for the soft footsteps of night shift nurses and the distant hum of essential machinery. Elena had barely slept, spending the hours before dawn reviewing Marcus's case files, studying his scans, and mentally rehearsing every step of the surgery she was about to perform, she told herself. It was standard preparation, the same careful planning she applied to every major operation. She didn't allow herself to acknowledge that she had never spent quite this much time preparing for any previous surgery. Marcus had been given a mild sedative an hour earlier, but he was still awake when Elena entered the pre-operative area. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the hospital gown and the IV lines snaking from his arms. The powerful businessman who had built an empire through sheer force of will was now just another patient, vulnerable and dependent on the skill of others. "Good morning, Marcus," Elena said, checking his chart one final time. "How are you feeling?" "Like a man about to have his chest cut open by someone who has every reason to hate him," Marcus replied, attempting a weak smile. Elena looked at him seriously. "I don't hate you, Marcus. I did, for a while. But hatred is exhausting, and I have better things to do with my energy." A nurse approached with the anesthesia consent forms, but Marcus waved her away for a moment. "Elena, I need to say something before you put me under. I need you to know that I understand what I gave up when I left you. I spent 20 years thinking I made the right choice, that success would be enough to fill the hole I created in my life. I was wrong." Elena felt something twist in her chest, but her expression remained professional. "Marcus, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do." Marcus's voice was urgent now, the sedative making him more emotional than usual. "I need you to know that not a single day went by that I didn't think about you, about us, about the life we could have built together. I achieved everything I thought I wanted, but I lost the only thing that actually mattered." The pre-operative area fell quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital waking up. Elena stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her, fighting to maintain the professional distance that had gotten her through the last 24 hours. "I need you to also know," Marcus continued, his words slightly slurred from the medication, "that I trust you completely. Not because you're the best surgeon in the state, though you are. Not because you have the highest success rate, though you do. I trust you because you're Elena, and despite everything I did to hurt you, you're still the most honorable person I've ever known." Elena felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you for saying that, Marcus. It means more than you know." The anesthesiologist approached, indicating it was time to begin. Elena nodded to the team, and they began wheeling Marcus toward the operating room. As they moved down the hallway, Marcus reached out and caught Elena's hand. "If something goes wrong in there," he said softly, "I want you to know that I finally understand what you meant when you said I was your heart walking around outside your body. You were mine too, Elena. You always were." Elena squeezed his hand gently, then released it as they entered the operating room. "Nothing is going to go wrong, Marcus. I promise you that." The next 6 hours would test every skill Elena had developed over her career. Marcus's condition was more complicated than the initial scans had revealed. His arteries more damaged than expected from years of stress and poor lifestyle choices. What should have been a routine triple bypass became an intricate surgical puzzle, requiring Elena to reroute blood flow around areas of damage that hadn't shown up on any preoperative test. Sarah Kim, Elena's surgical partner, worked alongside her with practiced efficiency. They had performed hundreds of surgeries together, and Sarah could read Elena's movements like a choreographed dance. But today, something was different about Ayla's technique. She was working with an intensity and precision that went beyond her usual excellence. "Pressure's dropping," announced the anesthesiologist, his voice cutting through the focused quiet of the operating room. Elena's hands never paused in their delicate work. "I see it. Sarah, can you increase the flow on the bypass machine? We're dealing with more damage than expected." "What do you think caused this level of deterioration?" Sarah asked, adjusting the heart-lung machine that was keeping Marcus alive while Elena worked. 20 years of putting work before health," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the complexity of the repair she was performing. 20 years of believing that success was worth any sacrifice. As Elena worked to repair the damage to Marcus's heart, she found herself thinking about the damage they had both sustained over the years. Marcus had sacrificed his health and personal relationships for business success. She had built walls around her own heart, using her career as both shield and sword against future pain. They had both achieved their professional goals, but at costs neither of them had fully understood at the time. The surgery required every technique Elena had mastered over her career. She grafted new vessels to bypass blocked arteries, repaired damaged tissue, and slowly, methodically restored blood flow to Marcus's starving heart muscle. Her hands moved with the precision of an artist and the steady confidence of someone who had performed this miracle hundreds of times before. "His heart rhythm is stabilizing," reported the cardiac monitor technician. Elena allowed herself a small smile behind her surgical mask. "Good. We're past the critical phase. Sarah, let's begin the closure." As they carefully closed Marcus's chest, Elena felt a strange sense of completion, as if she were repairing more than just blocked arteries. In saving Marcus's heart, she was somehow healing something in herself that had been broken for 20 years. The post-operative period was critical. Elena stayed with Marcus through his initial recovery, monitoring his vital signs, adjusting medications, and watching for any complications. He remained unconscious for the first 12 hours after surgery, his body working to heal from the trauma of the operation. When Marcus finally opened his eyes, Elena was sitting beside his bed, reading through patient charts. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the cardiac ICU, casting long shadows across the sterile floor. "Am I alive?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube. Elena looked up from her charts and smiled. "Very much so. The surgery was successful. We repaired 3 blocked arteries and restored full blood flow to your heart. You're going to need several weeks of recovery and cardiac rehabilitation, but your prognosis is excellent." Marcus tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his chest. "Thank you doesn't seem adequate for what you've done." "Thank you is exactly adequate," Elena replied. "It's what patients say to their doctors when treatment is successful. Nothing more complicated than that." But even as she spoke the words, Elena knew it wasn't that simple. Saving Marcus's life had forced her to confront feelings and memories she had spent years avoiding. Seeing him vulnerable and dependent had stripped away the anger she had carried, leaving behind something more complex and harder to define. Over the following days, as Marcus recovered in the cardiac unit, Elena found herself stopping by his room more often than was strictly necessary. She told herself she was monitoring a complex case, ensuring that her surgical work was healing properly. But the truth was more complicated. Marcus was a different person as a patient than he had been as her former lover, or as the demanding billionaire who had insisted on the best surgeon money could buy. Pain and vulnerability had stripped away the arrogance and ruthless ambition, revealing glimpses of the man she had once fallen in love with. "I've been thinking about what you said," Marcus told her during one of her visits, "about success being an excuse for sacrificing the things that actually matter." Elena checked his incision sites, noting with satisfaction how well he was healing. "And? What conclusions had you reached?" "That you were right. I spent 20 years building something that looks impressive from the outside but feels hollow on the inside. I have more money than I could spend in 5 lifetimes, but I eat dinner alone every night. I have a company worth billions, but no one to share the success with. I achieved everything I thought I wanted and ended up with nothing that actually matters." Elena finished her examination and made notes in his chart. "It's not too late to change that, Marcus. You're only 52. You have potentially decades ahead of you to build a different kind of life." "Did you build the life you wanted?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I built a meaningful life. I save people. I make a difference. I use my skills to help others. My work gives me purpose and satisfaction. But are you happy?" The question hit Elena harder than she expected. Happiness was something she had stopped thinking about years ago, focusing instead on purpose and professional fulfillment. "I'm content, Marcus. That's more than many people can say." "Content isn't the same as happy." "No," Elena admitted. "It's not." As Marcus's recovery progressed and his discharge date approached, both of them began to grapple with what would happen next. The artificial environment of the hospital had created a space where they could interact as doctor and patient, but once Marcus left, they would have to decide what, if anything, their relationship would become. "I want to see you again," Marcus said the night before his discharge. Not as your patient, but as, I don't know what. Friends? Former lovers trying to find closure? Two middle-aged people who shared something important once and might have something to offer each other now. Elena stood by his window, looking out at the city lights. I don't know if that's a good idea, Marcus. We hurt each other badly. Once some wounds are better left alone. Or maybe some wounds need to be properly healed instead of just bandaged over. Elena turned to face him, studying the man lying in the hospital bed. The angry, ambitious young man who had left her 20 years ago was gone, replaced by someone who seemed genuinely reflective and regretful. But people could change back just as easily as they changed forward. What are you really asking, Marcus? I'm asking for a chance to apologize properly. I'm asking for the opportunity to show you that I'm not the same person who walked away from the best thing in his life. I'm asking if you might be willing to have coffee with me sometime, as two adults who've both learned some hard lessons about what actually matters. Elena was quiet for a long time, weighing the risks and possibilities. Finally, she spoke. Coffee. One time. Public place. No expectations beyond a conversation between two people who used to know each other. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him since his arrival at the hospital. That's all I'm asking for. 6 weeks later, Elena Vasquez sat in a small cafe near the hospital, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the door. She had almost canceled 3 times, questioned the wisdom of this meeting, and prepared herself for disappointment. When Marcus walked through the door, she barely recognized him. Gone was the stressed, demanding businessman who had insisted on the best surgeon money could buy. This Marcus moved more slowly, seemed more thoughtful, smiled at the barista who took his order. He had lost weight during his recovery, and his face had a calm quality that hadn't been there in the hospital. You look good, Elena said as he sat down across from her. I feel different, Marcus replied. Clearer somehow. Like I'd been looking at the world through dirty glass for 20 years and someone finally cleaned it. They talked for 2 hours, sharing stories about their careers, their failures, their regrets, and their hopes. Marcus told her about the changes he was making to his company, stepping back from daily operations to focus on philanthropic work. Elena talked about her plans to expand the hospital's charity cardiac program, providing free heart surgery to patients who couldn't afford it. I've established a foundation, Marcus said as their conversation wound down. It's going to fund cardiac surgery for low-income patients. I was hoping you might be willing to head up the medical side of the program. Elena studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agendas. She found only sincerity and hope. That would mean working together. It would mean working toward the same goal, saving lives, making a difference, using my resources and your skills to help people who need it most. Elena considered the offer. It was exactly the kind of work she wanted to do, the perfect use of her abilities and experience. The fact that it would involve working with Marcus was both the best and worst part of the proposition. I'll think about it, she said finally. As they parted ways outside the cafe, Marcus touched her arm gently. Elena, I know I have no right to ask this, but do you think we might be able to find our way back to friendship? Not what we had before, but something new, built on who we are now instead of who we were then. Elena looked at this man, who had once broken her heart, and whom she had recently held that same heart in her hands to repair it. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. I think, she said carefully, that friendship is something we could work toward, but it will take time, Marcus. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal as easily as arteries. I have time, Marcus replied. For the first time in 20 years, I have all the time in the world. 3 months later, the Chen Foundation's cardiac surgery program performed its first operation, providing a life-saving procedure to a 7-year-old girl whose family couldn't afford the surgery. Dr. Elena Vasquez led the surgical team, funded by resources from Marcus Chen's foundation. They weren't lovers again, and they might never be. But they had found something perhaps more valuable, a partnership built on shared purpose, mutual respect, and the hard-won wisdom that came from understanding what truly mattered in life. Marcus had demanded the most skilled surgeon and had frozen when he saw who it was. But in the end, he got exactly what he needed. Not just a repaired heart, but a chance to repair the damage he had caused 20 years earlier. And Elena discovered that sometimes the best way to heal old wounds is to use them as the foundation for building something new and meaningful. In the end, they both got their second chances. Not the fairy tale reunion they might have dreamed of in their youth, but something more valuable, the opportunity to be better people than they had been, to use their talents and resources to make a difference in the world, and to find peace with the choices that had led them to this moment. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't getting what you think you want, but discovering what you actually need. Marcus Chen had learned that lesson the hard way, and Elena Vasquez had been there to save not just his heart, but his understanding of what it means to truly live.